What's going on, folks? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review Jeezy's USDA group, their debut album, Cold Summer. Now, this basically came out in the spring of 2007, and it was right on the heels of Jeezy's The Inspiration from late 2006, which kind of yielded a couple of big hit singles. I reviewed that back in the fall of last year, and that album had a couple megaton hits like I Love It, Go Get a 3 a.m., some of those type records. But this is kind of like, considering that this came out less than 6 months after Jeezy's The Inspiration, it was kind of like an extra dose of Jeezy added with the support of his USDA group, which is basically Blood Raw, whose album I also reviewed last fall, and then Slick Pulla, whose mixtape I reviewed just a couple weeks ago. So that's the two of these guys. Blood Raw is from Florida, kind of has more of that Miami bass type flow towards it. He's not from Atlanta like Jeezy and Slick Pulla. And then Slick Pulla is a real distinguished swag rapper. So that's kind of the concept about both of them. And so they came onto the scene with the song White Girl, and I'm looking on Wikipedia, and it says that Jeezy basically intended for this Cold Summer album to be like Trap or Die on steroids. And I can see that because it has a mixtape feel, a lot of songs for the strip clubs, a lot of songs for like well, yeah, a lot of songs for like strip clubs and those type nightlife type scenarios, and that's not a bad thing at all. And I would definitely have to say it does not quite have the glossary of impact that the Inspiration does, but I would say it might be a better album. I might actually say I might like this album better than I like the Inspiration, despite the fact that the singles and the topic archetype of the Inspiration is probably better. So it's a draw. I would probably wind up getting both of these if you were to see them, but that's just kind of the concept, just to say that there are more hit songs on this project and a lot more moments for stepping out than there are in the Inspiration. But the Inspiration just has, like, I feel like I Love It, Go Get a 3 a.m., Hypnotize, and like some of those type records are probably better from the Inspiration, but it's still pretty rock solid. So there's just a number of tracks from that. So I'm gonna go ahead and talk about the singles. So the first single from this project is White Girl, and this one was produced by Drumma Boy, who produced a few tracks on Jeezy's Inspiration. He's a mainstay with Jeezy from back in the day. And it's just kind of like, this has a real syrupy kind of production on here, just a real emphatic kind of eerie and kind of leery, kind of feels like you're smoking, feels like you're a little distorted type feel towards it. Definitely like the beat on here. It's an excellent Drumma Boy beat, and Jeezy, Slick Pulla, and Blood Raw all do great on the song. They just make it a real hooky type song. I got that White Girl, Christina Aguilera, synonyms for cocaine and that type stuff. And I would have to say, it's a pretty hit song. I would definitely say this is probably the best beat on this whole album. I mean, most of the production for the rest of this project is not quite as distinguished as this song. I felt like this was like the most boisterous one on here, but it definitely is a highlight. This feels like what could have been like the third or fourth single from Jeezy's Inspiration if you didn't know better. This feels like another standard Jeezy song that he just brought his buddies along for the ride, and they both fit the song well. And you'll eventually see later on in this album that Blood Raw does have some moments himself where he kind of starts impacting towards where he's starting to get an album out, because I like Slick Pulla, but it kind of felt like Blood Raw was about to be the next person to drop an album, just because Slick Pulla didn't really grab any songs for himself. Like, there's a couple times on here that Blood Raw kind of has like two verses and tries to do a couple songs himself, but Slick Pulla doesn't really do that, minus the song Respect the Shield. So that's just kind of the concept. But White Girl definitely feels like a leftover or a late single for a Jeezy album. It's just an overall hit. Probably the best beat on this album. Just impactful. Just great. Jeezy in his prime, Slick Pulla and Blood Raw doing their thing, kicking ass. So that's just kind of the concept. So the second single, which I don't see talked about in an overabundance, is Corporate Thuggin', and this one has very similar production to a lot of other beats on here. This one's, I can see why this beat or this song didn't quite chart nearly as well as White Girl did, and White Girl was not that large a hit either. It was just a good kind of street single and kind of bubbler, but it didn't quite ever break even like Go Getta and I Love It and some of those type songs. But Corporate Thuggin' did even worse. And the whole thing about it kind of is I think, like, there's songs like Focus, Get It Up, Corporate Thuggin', and Throw This Money that all have very similar productions. They all kind of have like these horns that kind of blare in there, and they just kind of feel like standard strip club kind of anthems circa 2006, 2008, that type time period. And this, I really felt like possibly if Jeezy had put a little bit more emphasis. I mean, the hook is definitely great. I feel like this could be another substandard hit for Jeezy. I would have said that this would have been like a good fifth single. Definitely has that vibe of like a fifth single type feel towards it. But the problem with it is the production just does not jump off the page. The hook jumps off the page. It definitely is very hooky like White Girl is, but it just doesn't have the production is good, but it's just not A plus. I would have to say in terms of the impact of what it did. But it is a good song. I'm definitely going to recommend it just because it's an excellent song. Is Jeezy kind of talking more in the context of less what you've seen from him? Because at that point he only had like 2 albums out, so it's just kind of getting some concepts from Jeezy. Like on one of these songs, like Quickie, Jeezy talks about Red Bull, so it's not really something that Jeezy talks about in abundance and as much. So it's just kind of interesting, kind of get some of those vibes. There's some extra lyrics from Jeezy when normally he only puts out an album like once every 18 months or something like that. So this is just kind of an extra surprise, especially in the single format to get. It's kind of like a bonus song from Jeezy and then have Blood Raw and Slick Pulla be on there as well. This is kind of the concept. It works, but I can see it kind of being the reason, maybe not the reason, but the last single that they dropped from this album, because this album just didn't have any other singles on par with White Girl, and Corporate Thuggin' just really felt like a street single and was just kind of, it's good, and just the brassy kind of production and that type of stuff. It just feels like a strip club anthem and just kind of a standard kind of like night venue type stuff, but it's just kind of, that's just the situation. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the songs I recommend. There are 10 songs out of 14 I recommend. I'm going to get to these. So the 10 songs I recommend are Go Get a Remix, White Girl, Throw This Money, Quickie, Corporate Thuggin', Get It Up, Check, Pam, Focus, and What It Is. So I feel like Go Get a Remix has a pretty extensive beat. These Drumma Boy beats are pretty much the best ones on here. I feel like the 3 Drumma Boy beats, if you don't know them, they would be White Girl, Quickie, and Go Get a Remix. All 3 of these are really outstanding. Quickie has this really kind of like slinky kind of hood chick kind of feel towards it. Definitely something for a night cruise trying to bag some women and that type of stuff. That's a real excellent song as Quickie. That's the one where Jeezy talks about Red Bull and stuff. And like Go Get a Remix has a different beat from the original Go Get It, and it's just excellent. I mean, it's too bad that Blood Raw and Slick Pulla aren't on there, but he puts Bun B and Jadakiss on there, which is kind of odd pairings. I wonder why they showed up for that one, but they are on there. And Jeezy has a new verse on Go Get a Remix, and he does a pretty swift job on there. So I just would have to say that's pretty excellent. Definitely kind of blistering beat. All of the 3 Drummer Boy beats are excellent. Go Get a Remix is definitely blistering. Just it feels like a fireworks show kinda. And like I said, Focus, Get It Up, Corporate Thuggin', and Throw This Money all have very similar kind of horns and brassy kind of feels to them, but they're not bad productions, but they kind of feel similar in the context of saying that they just kind of have similar feels, just kind of making it rain and not really paying attention to much else and that sort of thing. But these are just excellent kind of cuts for like a standard night out. But it's just kind of the fact, I do wish that there would have been some variance in the beats a little bit, because that's like the thing I talked about with Jeezy's inspirations. There just were different ones for there. There were moments like Hypnotize, moments like 3 a.m., moments uh I forget some of the songs on Hypnotize, 3 a.m., Go Get a, just differential songs from inspiration and that type of stuff that just kind of had some moments. I Get Money, I want to say was one of those. So there just were a lot of differential ones, but most of these kind of just feel like, I would have to say a lot, and even What It Is kind of similar to those songs too. That one just doesn't have Jeezy on there. So there's just a lot of kind of very similar type songs that just sound like, so yeah, I would have to say that this album is just pretty much intended for like a night at a strip club, a night just in some sort of nightlife type atmosphere, just kind of, and I say that like I'm complaining about it, but it's just more the context where you just would look after like a standard night out where this album can be played for pretty much the same session for going out. It's got enough cuts to kind of rotate a lot of these. I'd say there's only like one or two or three songs. They're not for the said night out that you're going with, but you just have to understand that a lot of these songs sound similar. That's the problem. It's not so much that these are all strip club songs and club oriented songs in some cases. Not really so much club. I didn't see like really any dance club or club type stuff minus White Girl and maybe Corporate Thuggin'. But for the most part, it's just kind of it's strip club and kind of like titty bar type stuff. And I just would have to say that's kind of the concept about it. So it's just kind of that's about the only real thing to knock about is just the similarities, is the fact that they sound similar. But other than that, there are some other ones like Pam is another song for the ladies. These Pam and Quickie are both two nice joints for that. They both have these kind of syrupy, slinky kind of feels towards them. I just kind of feel like moving through the bushes type feel, just kind of the night groove, just kind of real covert and that type stuff, I would have to say. And what it is, this is one of the ones I talked about where Jeezy isn't on and Blood Raw is kind of on there. This one has a little bit more of a club type feel towards this. Kind of feels like a nice musing, kind of chilling at the booth type song, maybe brewing with a beer, that type stuff. It's just interesting to have Blood Raw kind of basically take the helm for himself and just have Slick Polo kind of ride shotgun on the songs. It's interesting kind of get that one. Yeah, I would have to say that that virtually takes care of like all the songs as far as that kind of goes. It's just you get a lot of strip club joints, you get kind of some club joints with White Girl, Quickie, Corporate Thuggin', and Go Get a Remix. But for the most part, it's more kind of titty bar than dance club and that type of stuff. There's not really, I mean, because this is kind of a street album and it's very, I mean, this kind of back in the day, I used to think that this was kind of pushing it as far as something that barely made the push to like a commercial album and being on a CD. But there's way more stuff like Broken Side, stuff like Blood on the Dance Floor, those type folks. There's so many more that barely made the cut. Stuff like JJ Demon that barely had a CD manufactured. This is kind of well above that type ground, but it still is basically a street album. I would just have to say, like Jeezy said, like this album was Trap or Die on steroids, and that's believable just because it's a street album and it doesn't really attempt to cross over to the mainstream minus White Girl and Go Get a Remix. That's something to kind of keep in mind, is for the most part it keeps it kind of gutta and grimy throughout most of this project, and you just have to kind of understand that it just doesn't really have much of like the crossover and break through the floodgates type appeal. But it's not like it's bad. It's just the fact that it keeps it kind of in the lane that it wants to stay in. That's just kind of the concept. But it's not like it's introverted. So it's just something to know. It is stepping out, just more in strip clubs. So that's kind of the situation. So I'm gonna give this album me liking 10 songs out of 14. I'm gonna give this album an 8.75 out of 10. I feel like if I had liked one more song, but then I guess I don't know. I mean, really, I'm contemplating giving this album a 9 out of 10. I guess I could. I could give this album a 9 out of 10 just because I feel like if I would have liked one or two more songs, probably one more song, it would have been like a 9.5. But I feel like a 9 out of 10. I mean, an 8.75 is basically a 9, so I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 just because there's a lot of quality on here. I did like both the singles. I did like the overall outgoing feel of it. It's just a fun burst of energy and just kind of street and kind of has that edge about it too, and just kind of has like an extra vestige of fun and some secret Jeezy verses, kind of getting some extra thoughts on his mind and that type of stuff, and seeing Slick Pull and Blood Raw kind of on their album type stuff. So that's just kind of the situation there. The social score, I'm going to give a 7 out of 10 just because it did have some, but like I said, a lot of the beats are similar, and maybe like there could have been a few more guests on here, something like that. I would have liked to see who they could have teamed up with. I mean, minus a couple CTE buddies called Rocket and 211, there really was not much of anything on here that really, it's just them the whole way. I mean, the pairings for how they arrange the verses, like sometimes Blood Raw goes first, sometimes Slick Pull goes first, sometimes Blood Raw drops two verses. Sometimes Jeezy doesn't drop any verses. I mean, the arrangements for how they did this was pretty clever, but I still would have liked a little bit of like a more fresh kind of beat palette. And then I would also have to say maybe a few guests on there too. It's just kind of that's the situation about it. But also to talk about some of the songs I didn't like, I really felt like Live My Life was kind of like a crossover attempt. That was, I guess there was a crossover attempt on here, but it was the most outlandish just because it didn't make sense. It was really even odd to hear Jeezy on a song like that. Really kind of felt like a backpacker song almost, Live My Life. I just didn't enjoy that one. And I didn't like Respect the Shield. I mean, I would have liked that one if Jeezy had been on it and maybe the beat had been a little bit less thumping and where you could hear the kind of piano type stuff or whatever that kind of tittering that kind of is in the background on there. And I kind of, it felt like Trap or Die from Jeezy's Thug Motivation 101, but just didn't quite pull it off as well. But that was Slick Pull's only real song that didn't have Blood Raw or Jeezy on there. So yeah, I wish he would have had a few more songs like that. And like I keep telling myself, and Ride Tonight just didn't quite have a good enough beat arrangement for me. I kind of felt like those were kind of weak beats that were even beneath like some of the ones I said that were good but didn't jump off the page. So it's just kind of like I said, this album is kind of produced well, but it's not the best produced. That's just kind of the concept. It's serviceable to have an avid nightlife, but it's not like 10 out of 10 in terms of like beat selection. I kind of feel like there are some great strip club cuts on here. I feel like White Girl, Go Get a Remix, and Corporate Thuggin' are all the most splashy kind of songs on here, and they jump off the page the most. And Quickie is a really nice kind of in the cut with your boo type song, definitely something like that. So there are some good moments for that sort of thing, but yeah, I just would have to say that's kind of the concept there. So it's just kind of there's more than half the album that's kind of for stepping out, but it's just kind of where I think if you're looking for more songs that have the sheer potential of White Girl, this is not quite there. But I would recommend Go Get a Remix and Corporate Thug. And besides that, so that's kind of the concept. In terms of the future, like USDA is not really around. Like Blood Raw is not affiliated with it, and I think Jeezy and Slick Pulla kind of have a beef or something like that. I'm not really sure, but it's too bad about that because this was a pretty solid album. Just to kind of say that, so it's kind of the situation. Definitely worth investing in. Definitely in a good few nights and a couple weekends worth of fun and that type of stuff. That's just kind of the thing there.